wait for this cameraman and then we'll get moving. Good evening and welcome to this inaugural public meeting of the Bostonians against sanctuary cities. My name is Lou Murray. I'm a resident of Boston, and that qualifies me to get together with some friends and try to get some attention paid to this very important issue. I want to just take a quick moment, if you can shut your eyes and pretend that it's not 2017. I want you to think back to another time in Boston. I want you to think back to 1860, when the mayor sent a bunch of hooligans to break up a meeting of abolitionists. He didn't want them to speak. Frederick Douglass, former slave, came to town, and Frederick Douglass was a hero in my house. He was talked about. He was a great friend of John Boyle O'Reilly, the Fenian patriot. And Frederick Douglass came to town, and he said, among other things, in his famous address to Bostonians on free speech, that to suppress speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as the speaker. And later in the speech he said, we thought that the principles of free speech was an accomplished fact. Here in Boston, if nowhere else, we thought the principle of free speech was an accomplished fact. I'll repeat that. Here, if nowhere else, we thought the right of people to assemble and to express their opinion was secure. And looking out amongst all you good people tonight, I know it is secure, whether you agree with our panelists and you agree with our group or not. The forum is going to take place. Each of the panelists is going to speak for between 5 and 10 minutes. At the 8-minute mark, I'm going to wave my hand, and maybe somebody in the front row can wave their hands, and we'll let them know that they've hit the limit. And we're going to go in this order. It'll be Jessica Vaughan first, Sheriff Tom Hodgson second, State Representative Geoff Diehl third, Walter Hempel, retired ICE agent, and Maureen Maloney, victim and mother, last. A couple quick announcements. On Friday, June the 9th, at 9 a.m., the Renew Massachusetts Coalition is alerting people that there will be a hearing at the State House on the Safe Communities Act, which is commonly known as the Sanctuary State Act. And they would like people to come and testify. The hearing starts at 10, and the Renew Massachusetts Coalition is going to get together at 9. Peter, are you here? Yeah. Peter is here. If you want more information, he'll be happy to help you. And thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chanel. There's a few other people I want to thank for helping make this evening happen. I want to thank the leadership of the Elks Hall for renting us the hall. And I want to thank the Massachusetts Coalition for Immigration Reform for helping to promote this event. I want to thank the Ward 20 Republican Committee. I want to thank the Hull Republican Town Committee, and the Needham Republican Town Committee, and the Newton Republican City Committee. And without the help of all those people, something as simple as a discussion on a very important issue wouldn't happen. And so I'd like to just begin. We're all here out of love. We love our country. We might be on different sides of the issue, but we're here out of love. And so I'm going to start the meeting with a moment of silence, and you can use it as you wish. And we're going to begin, as they used to begin many, many meetings, with the Pledge of Allegiance. Again, for those who wish. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So just a couple quick things. If anybody came in late, there are no signs allowed in the hall. We're not going to, I think we got the point across. We're not interested in hooliganism tonight. We're interested in back and forth during the question and answer period. The question and answer period will work this way. We've handed out cards. If you need more cards, we can get cards handed out, pencils. We'll collect the questions and we'll answer the questions. As I said, the panelists are going to make their remarks, and then we'll go right into the question and answer period. And I want to thank every single one of our panelists for coming, and I'll quickly introduce them. Walt Hempel is a recently retired special agent for ICE, and he was a federal law enforcement. Thank you, Walt. Jessica Vaughan is a noted researcher. She's with the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. Geoff Diehl is our lawmaker. He's from Beacon Hill by way of Whitman. Maureen Maloney was so kind to be part of this panel. She lost her son, Matthew, Denice, in a drunken driving accident. It was particularly heinous, committed by an illegal alien. And thank you, Maureen. And Sheriff Tom Hodgson for Bristol County. So let's just have a quick round of applause for our panel. And we're going to begin with Jessica Vaughan.
I tend to move around when I speak, so I'll try not to. I'm at the podium, I can hold on. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm glad to see so much interest in this topic, which is so important right now, and such an issue here in the Commonwealth as well as across the country. I'm with the Center for Immigration Studies. As Lou said, we focus on studying the impacts of immigration on American society with the goal of providing lawmakers and opinion leaders with information on immigration's effects on our country from the perspective of trying to find and arrive at immigration policies that work for the national interest rather than for special interests. And any of you who are interested in our research can find it at www.cis.org. All of our publications are there. In particular, I focus on the operational aspects of immigration policy and have been studying and writing about sanctuary policies for a number of years now, and have obtained government documents about the impact of sanctuary policies. We have a map on our website that shows where all of the sanctuary jurisdictions in the country are located and what makes them a sanctuary, what their policy is, and the level of their obstruction of cooperation with ICE is on there for more information. We have 6 sanctuary jurisdictions that I've identified in Massachusetts, not counting any of the policies that may have been adopted very recently that I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But I think it's important to define what we're talking about when we talk about sanctuary policies. A sanctuary policy means different things to different people, but what I'm focused on is sanctuary policies that have an effect on federal immigration agencies' ability to do their job, to enforce immigration laws, and to accomplish their mission, part of which is to protect public safety. Some people say that there is no definition of a sanctuary policy. That's not true. Actually, a federal law that was passed in 1996 does define a sanctuary policy, even though it doesn't name it as a sanctuary policy. What Section 1373 says is that no state or local jurisdiction can in any way restrict the communication or exchange of information between local officials and federal immigration authorities. So that means you can't, if you're a police chief, you can't tell your officers that they may never call ICE to get information, that they may never tell ICE about individuals who are in your jail, and that you can't block them from cooperating with ICE. So it is a federal law. By my definition, a sanctuary jurisdiction, mirroring that, is any policy that deliberately attempts to interfere with immigration enforcement, whether it's an ordinance, a resolution, a policy, or a practice. And as I said, there are about 300 of them in the United States right now. In Massachusetts, those are Boston, Lawrence, Amherst, Cambridge, Somerville, and Northampton. Why are sanctuary policies such a problem? The reason is because you first have to understand that the vast majority of immigration enforcement done by ICE is focused on finding and removing that small fraction of the population of aliens, non-citizens here, who have been involved in crime or are causing problems in their community. It's a small fraction of the total population that's here illegally, but it can also include people who are here legally, like a student who commits armed robbery, or a guest worker who assaults someone, or even someone with a green card who commits a particularly serious crime. And of course, people who are here illegally, all of whom are potentially subject to deportation, but ICE's priority is now and has always been those, that small fraction of the population that's living here illegally that is a threat to the community or causing problems in the community. So when jurisdictions have sanctuary policies, they're deliberately trying to make it hard for ICE to do its job, because usually for political reasons, they disagree with immigration enforcement, and they want to substitute their local judgment on who should be subject to immigration enforcement for the judgment of the federal government, which is actually responsible for and authorized to carry out immigration enforcement. What happens in reality is that sanctuary policies result then in the release of criminal aliens back to our community, rather than putting them on a path to deportation. In 2015, I had been noticing the proliferation of sanctuary policies around the country, and submitted an information request to ICE to find out what the effect of that was, and found that, according to ICE records from most of 2015, that sanctuary policies were resulting in the release of approximately 1,000 deportable offenders every month back to the streets of the communities. 63% of these individuals already had serious criminal history before the arrest that led them to be identified by ICE at that time. So about 2/3 of them have a significant criminal history and are appropriately a priority for ICE to remove. 23% of them were arrested again after they were released by the sanctuary policy, within 8 months, in fact, of being released. And they had accumulated, after their release, an average of 4 additional arrests. So, again, the result of sanctuary policies is the release of criminal aliens back to the streets instead of back to their home country. And ICE was only able to reapprehend about 40% of the individual offenders who were released by the sanctuary policies. They make ICE's job much more difficult. In fact, that's their goal. And the problem with that, ironically, is it means that ICE has to go out into the community to do its job and make arrests at people's homes, at their workplace, on the street, perhaps in a courthouse. Not only can that be upsetting to others in the community, it can also be dangerous both for the ICE officers and for bystanders who may be nearby. So there is both a public safety impact and an operational impact on our communities. And of course, there is a human cost to sanctuary policies when people who could have been, should have been deported are instead able to remain in the community and commit additional crimes. These are needless victims that are created by sanctuary policies. One of the main, as I said, sanctuary policies are typically adopted for political reasons. They're not usually requested by police chiefs or sheriffs or any other law enforcement agency, because these agencies operate on a principle of cooperation with each other, as Sheriff Hodgson, I'm sure, will tell us. One of the main, I call it an excuse for having a sanctuary policy that is politically motivated, that has been adopted by pretty much every sanctuary policy that I've noticed, is that they feel that they need to have these policies so that immigrants in the community will feel comfortable coming forward to authorities. That sanctuaries allege that there is a chilling effect that happens on immigrant crime reporting in the community. The problem is there is no evidence that this actually ever happened or is happening now. There is, crime reporting, of course, is a problem in every community, and it's legitimate for law enforcement agencies to try to address it. But the best way to address it is not to suspend enforcement of our laws or to refuse to cooperate with the enforcement of those laws. The best way to address this issue would be to do outreach in the immigrant community. There have been numerous studies that have been done in Virginia. I've looked at the crime reporting data here in Boston and found that there actually isn't a chilling effect that happens when there is good, robust cooperation between local police and ICE. It's just something that has been manufactured as a reason to have this policy. But let's take it at face value, just to think about it. I don't believe that there is necessarily a conflict between community policing practices and gaining trust of the community with cooperating with immigration enforcement. There are lots of ways to encourage and make it easy for people to report crime that we do here in the city of Boston. There are anonymous tip lines. There are officers on the force who speak the language of the community. They can have non-uniform personnel taking crime reports. They can do community forums and so on. And most importantly, explain what the purpose of immigration enforcement is and the purpose of their cooperation with ICE. And that, most importantly, that victims and witnesses to crimes are never a target for immigration enforcement unless those victims and witnesses are themselves criminals and a danger to the public. So, and I honestly really wish that the advocacy groups that are promoting sanctuary policies would tell immigrants in the community that victims and witnesses are not a target for immigration enforcement, instead of whipping up all of this fear of authorities that they have to do to justify the sanctuary policy. I was recently testifying before Congress, and with me on the panel was a woman who was a domestic violence advocate, and she said that she does not encourage the victims that she works with to seek out restraining orders against their abusers if they are here illegally. That to me is just terribly unfortunate for these victims, all for the political purpose of trying to create this mistrust between immigrants and authorities over the issue of immigration enforcement. Is very unfortunate. And let's remember, immigration laws are not some outdated, obsolete laws that don't deserve to be enforced. Not only do they protect the public and our national security, but they also protect opportunity for Americans and for legal immigrants, for jobs, particularly protect opportunities for those Americans and legal immigrants that are in direct competition for job opportunities. They also protect taxpayers from the costs of services to a population that's in the country illegally. Here in the Commonwealth, we spend about $2 billion a year in providing those services. So let's remember that, again, that immigration laws are important to enforce. The public expects to see them enforced, and it's only fair to legal immigrants to enforce our immigration laws so that the public can have confidence in our immigration system and sustain that immigration system that welcomes legal immigrants. So I will look forward to your questions, and I would like to turn over the microphone to my next co-panelist. Thank you very much.
All that money at Channel 2? You didn't get your fresh batteries? Okay. Our next speaker is Sheriff Tom Hodgson. He's the Sheriff of Bristol County, and we're so glad to welcome him to Suffolk County tonight.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is probably the most important issue facing our country right now in regards to the spectrums that it crosses in our society, from healthcare to education to public safety. Every aspect of our society is impacted by illegal immigration. And tonight we're talking about the issue of sanctuary cities in relation to that. And recently I was testifying with Jessica in Washington on this very issue around what should we do when elected officials in this country decide that they're going to determine how much of the federal law they want to follow or not. And my answer was, issue arrest warrants. I don't care if you're But we got elected first and foremost. Every one of us have been given the privilege to serve. And when we took that oath, we swore to uphold the Constitution and laws of this Commonwealth. And what elected official should have the right to defy that oath, their promise to the people, and say, you know what, I'm going to create a sanctuary for criminals and other people who want to come here illegally so that they can avoid the law? Why would we create a special class of people who do not have to abide by the rule of law in this country when everyone else does? It's wrong. It's un-American. If you don't like the laws of the United States of America, lobby to change them. But we have a process here. And the laws are much like the rules we teach, hopefully teach our children. There's right and there's wrong. And this is not about being anti-immigrant. Trust me. My father was an immigrant. Came here from England, raised 13 children, put us through school, made all the right choices, did all the right things. My father, when he walked down the street, he wasn't looking over his shoulder because he came here the right way. And I heard a chant outside when I was coming in. It was something to the effect of, no hate, no fear, we want immigrants here. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts there's not one person in this room, I don't care what side of the issue you're on, that doesn't agree with that. That's why we're all here. Sadly, this country and this community, the communities across Massachusetts are divided, not because we're anti-immigrant. It's because Congress has failed to do the comprehensive immigration reform. And I've been working on this for 20 years, going back to the days of Henry Hyde and Barney Frank, on a bipartisan bill that made it through the House but never made it through the Senate. And since then, both sides of the aisle have used it as a political football. And guess who's left to fight about it? The people of our communities. But Congress's inaction is not a reason why we should begin to unravel the laws that protect our democracy and suddenly start to suggest that anyone, particularly elected officials, can start creating a sanctuary for people that they know may be targets, and I don't want to hear, when I hear people say, well, you know, some of these people are just, that are taking sanctuary, haven't committed a crime. And that's probably true, many of them probably hasn't had it. But neither had the Zarnaev brothers until they set off those bombs in Boston. Neither had Muhammad Atta when he was at the flight school and all his little buddies getting ready to hit the World Trade Centers. See, the thing is, that person you're harboring in there, you don't know who they are. That's why you want the officials. You want us in law enforcement to partner with each other, to be able to identify who are those people, and if they are somebody that's on our list in ICE, or someone knows of a record, or they've re-entered the country, I think all of us want to know that, because you don't know what the next act is that they're going to do in that community. And ironically, it probably won't be in that sanctuary city. It's probably going to be in the neighboring city. Why would they blow up or commit an act that's going to call attention to them in the very place that they can hide? It defies logic. It defies human behavior. But what defies logic more than anything is the idea that we're going to create a special class of people who can be protected from the law by people who are supposed to uphold it and enforce it. I'll tell you a little story that just happened about 5 weeks ago. Tacoma, Washington is a sanctuary community. Bless you. And the trooper got a call to go to an accident scene. He arrives at the scene, he gets both driver's licenses, he runs both of them. One of them comes back, it says, this individual has committed a serious crime, been deported twice, contact ICE. Trooper gets on the phone, he calls ICE immediately from the accident scene and says, listen, I'm at the accident scene, just ran this thing, this is what's come back. They said, thank you very much, we'll be right there. They showed up within minutes. They got that driver, locked him up, took him away for detention and for ultimately hearing and then hopefully deportation. The trooper came into work the next day, was given a notification by his superior that he was under investigation for contacting ICE. Think about that. This trooper got a call to go to an accident scene, and he had two choices. When he saw that message come across, ignore what ICE said about contacting them and commit a felony under federal law, section 1324, which says that anyone who knows someone to be in the country illegally and attempts to harbor or conceal them commits a felony under federal law up to 5 years per alien. Or, so violate his oath and his promise, or uphold the law, do his job and his commitment to the people, and face disciplinary action. Those were his only two choices under sanctuary cities. Ladies and gentlemen, under those circumstances, it's impossible to protect you. If you're going to tell us that we cannot, in a sanctuary city, get whatever information and use whatever maximum tools we have to find out who the bad guys are, and make sure they don't get released or put back out in your community, to have what happened to Matthew Denice, God rest his soul, and I think it's on average now about 12 people killed a day in America by illegals. So when you start to think about what's really going on here, this is about protecting our communities. And you know, I had some of the reporters when I was mentioning, they'd asked me, did you really say that you wanted to see these elected officials locked up? And even saw some people bridle when I said it. I said, why would they be treated any differently than the people who put them in office and asked them to protect them, who would do the same thing? Because they'd be arrested, they'd face consequences. You know, I'm sick and tired of these elected officials that get into office and use their positions to advance their political agendas. It's not the people's agenda. You can't possibly be looking to try to protect the citizens if you're giving people harbor that may be a threat to them. You know, Jessica mentioned something about the chiefs. And you'll hear some people that are pro-illegal, pro-sanctuary city say, well, you know what? The chiefs of police, they think it's okay. They think these people, you know, they're worried about people not coming forward and reporting crimes. Hogwash. Hogwash. First of all, how would you know they didn't come forward and report the crime if they didn't come forward and report the crime? How do you measure that? Right? And secondarily, they're not locking people up to come forward as a witness. They're not doing that. And ask people to tell you, give us a list of who they are. They don't. These are talking points. These are red herrings. It's all it is to try to advance this whole issue around. And if you ever listen to people who are out there arguing the point for sanctuary cities, listen to the word they use. Not words, but the word. This isn't fair to immigrants. You know, we're not going after immigrants. We're going after criminal, illegal aliens. Criminal, illegal aliens. But they don't use the word illegal. Pay close attention when you hear these arguments, and whenever you hear them, I would ask you to ask the person to clarify, are you talking about immigrant or illegal immigrant? Because they conveniently leave it out. Time and time again. This is all about how they present it. But I will tell you from a law enforcement standpoint, without question, that sanctuary cities absolutely make our communities less safe and put you and your families at more risk. And how many more deaths, how many more sad situations do we have to face in this country? Because we have people who want to harbor the criminals at the expense of the people, as I said, that we were sworn to protect. You know, the whole sanctuary city issue is exactly what Jessica said. It's all about politics and nothing more than that. And when they tell me, which has just happened, I'm sure some of you heard about the bill that was filed by Representative Cabral, that somehow when somebody gets parked in my facility, we shouldn't be able to hold them and release them back out in the community. Where do you think they're going to go? They're going to hide in the place where they could be least likely be caught. And trust me, for anyone who thinks that terrorism isn't going to happen again around here, it's accommodated. It's here. We got terrorists in Massachusetts, believe me. That one of the Zarnaev brothers, the younger one, was going to my daughter's hair salon, which is about a quarter mile from where I work. He lived about a quarter mile from my home. And when they come here, and I've been working on terrorism and homeland security since I took office in 1998. And I can trust you, I can assure you, and I'm going to cut it off now, I can assure you that they're plotting and planning, and the places that they're going to go, like any one of us would, is to the place where we can hide and not be visually noticed and where people can protect us. So anyway, my time's up. I think I went past it, and I apologize to the other panelists. But thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
We've heard from local law enforcement, and let's hear from a lawmaker. I'd like you to put your hands together for Geoff Diehl, Representative Geoff Diehl. He's going to tell us about what's happening on Beacon Hill.
Thanks, Lou. In case anybody is unaware, I'm exploring a campaign to run for United States Senator against Elizabeth Warren. This is a senator who is very outspoken against Donald Trump's travel ban, and I'm sure what you guys are aware of, and following up on Sheriff Hodgson's talk about the Denice brothers. We wanted to make sure, Donald Trump wanted to make sure that those coming into our country, we did a temporary pause to figure out the vetting of those who want to come into our country to make sure that they are being tracked in case there is some sort of criminal background or some sort of terrorist background that we should be aware of. And just so you know, back when the Tsarnaev brothers, the marathon bombing happened, we found out that they were flying back and forth to Chechnya, their supposed home where they were refugees from, but they were flying back and forth anyway, and there was miscommunication between federal and local law enforcement. They did not know that this was happening. It could have been a tip-off to prevent that tragedy that happened. And so that is what we are trying to prevent, is people who are coming here to this country to create problems, not to become legal immigrants. And I want to back up, and I totally agree again with another statement, which is that there is probably nobody in this country who is against immigration into the United States. We are an incredible country of opportunity, and I'm sure most everybody here can find a line to their descendants and be thankful they came here. I know I'm grateful to be here in the United States through my descendants. Now let me give you a quick history lesson based on what I've learned on Beacon Hill. I've been in office for 7 years. During the first 4 years, I was on the Ways and Means Committee. And I heard the same testimony every year when we went out to do the budget. What happens is all the member of Ways and Means go around the state and we have hearings, and every state department or agency that wants funding comes and has a time where they talk to you about what their budget requests are. The most interesting to me was always the Department of Immigration and Refugees, and the testimony almost never changed. Okay? And I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. Here's what they'll tell you during that testimony. They'll tell you that, according to Mira, there were about 300,000 people in the state of Massachusetts who are here, who are eligible for naturalization. All right? Then they will tell you that based on state and federal joint funding of the Department of Immigration and Refugees, they can only process about 1,500 people a year. Then they will tell you that only about 500 people will ultimately apply to become citizens and go through that program, and only about half of them ultimately become citizens and are sworn in. So with that giant pool of 300,000, we are down to 500, maybe 1,000 at best, people getting processed through the State Department and the Federal Department of Naturalization and Immigration. Now, just want to take you back to a further history lesson of how things used to be done before World War I, when the federal government before they put in that Department of Immigration and Refugees. What they used to do was allow your district courts to process people who wanted to be here as a citizen. You had 2 years by the time you were in the country to go in and let the judge know you wanted to be a citizen. The judge would give you another 3 years to learn the language, prove that you had a sponsor, a job, a few qualifications, and if you come back in within those 3 years and you prove that all that, he would swear you in as a citizen. So there was no backlog. But what we've created with the Federal Department of Immigration and Refugees is a permanent backlog. We create this backlog for, I think, political reasons is one of the problems. There is sort of an effort to create a permanent dependency of people that live in the shadows, that are dependent on support systems in each of the states or federal government, these support systems, and they end up working under the table for corporations that sort of abuse them by having them work twice the hours for half the rate. And so it's a system that perpetuates itself, and the immigrants want to be citizens theoretically, but they also kind of get stuck in the system where they can't get processed. And so if they want to hire a lawyer, it costs, I think, somewhere between $40,000, sometimes $50,000 to become naturalized through a lawyer. So we have this problem of immigration down in Washington, D.C. We won't take care of it. And then you come to Massachusetts and you find out what's going on up on Beacon Hill as far as costs. Now, anybody know Jim Lyons from Andover? State representative from Andover, great guy. Jim Lyons is one of the great fighters. He actually was able to obtain from Governor Deval Patrick's administration the number of $1.8 billion. $1.8 billion is what our annual budget, at least in our annual budget, is what it costs for the services for people who are not here legally. So whether it's housing, whether it's education, other programs, it costs roughly $1.8 billion, and that's what they're willing to tell us. So, let's just take the $1.8 billion and say, that's money that could go, obviously, towards other parts of our budget that are lacking. And by the way, in the last 3 years, as you probably know too, tax revenues haven't been meeting the expectations. We've had to have 9C cuts for the last 3 years already. So, we've got veterans returning home, we're saying we can't afford them, we've got education issues we can't afford, and yet, again, we're not taking care of the core issue, which is trying to make sure that immigration is fixed so people can become citizens, and everything else becomes a symptom of that core problem. And so, I think, again, I don't want to take too much time and I want to hear your questions, but I just want to give you that perspective as a lawmaker on Beacon Hill. We sort of know what the problem is, but we're unable to take care of it. Now, fast forward to today, where we just had 2 bills, actually just 1 bill, and I want to thank a lot of you folks that Anybody call into the State House and object to 3033 by any chance? Anybody? I want to thank you guys for doing that. Give yourself a round of applause. As the sheriff mentioned, H3033 and then there was H3034 were attempts to try to block specifically Massachusetts Sheriff's Departments from working with immigration officials to try to solve some of the problems as well. H3033 would have basically said, and by the way, imagine the irony, right? We've got lawmakers in our state who get very angry about hearing that Jeff Sessions is going to use withholding federal funds to punish sanctuary cities, but here they were going to do is basically punish the Sheriff's Department by financially punishing them if they were working with ICE. Okay, so there's the hypocrisy right there. The other thing is, they were saying, you cannot be a partner with ICE in detaining those who are here illegally with criminal backgrounds who are being held for deportation. And what people don't know about just Bristol County itself, and the sheriff, his office was kind enough to share this information with legislators who wanted to hear it, is that since 2011, their detention center has been bringing in $47 million total in federal funds for being a place where they can be detainers for criminals that are ready for deportation hearings. All right, and the expense of running that department was only about $7.9 million, I believe, around $8 million. So that hasn't been a massive net gain of federal dollars to come in, so long as we just partnered with them in helping them do their job, right? And this law that was potentially going to be proposed today would have ended that relationship with ICE, would have basically tied their hands and not allowed them to conduct their job. That, thanks to the outcry from so many citizens across Massachusetts who called into their legislators, the governor's office, the speaker's office, ultimately was able to get that thing pulled. It was going to be heard today, and by the way, when things are going to be heard on Beacon Hill, it means they're going to pass because there's a Democratic supermajority in the House and Senate, and if they bring a bill out, it's going through. They withdrew it from consideration today because of the work you guys did to let them know you did not want this to happen. So thank you. What they did debate today was House 3034, and House 3034 is saying that the sheriff could not use the prison labor and opt in an optional prison labor force if they wanted to get work, earn time off for good behavior. It's totally optional. Use that force to go outside of state borders to do either reciprocal help with natural disasters in other states or federal projects, which again we would be reimbursed for. So it wasn't something that we would be costing the state, it was something that would be helpful to other agencies. And by the way, we already have a New England reciprocal agreement with several of our New England states. And so if we had a natural disaster, they are authorized right now to bring their prisoners in to help on a natural disaster. But after today, we basically changed the law to say that Massachusetts will no longer send any of its prison population outside. And again, it's an opt-in. It is not it's not one of these chain gangs. Sheriff Hodgson doesn't have the mirrored sunglasses on there, and they're not tarring a road. This would be, for folks who in the prison want to get out, learn a trade maybe, be able to earn time off for good behavior. It's a beneficial program, a win-win for everybody. All right, and so that was what was passed today, unfortunately, and so we're going to have to. Look at the ramifications of that because, we had also talked about trying to study this to see what, the impact would be. They didn't want to study it, they just wanted to pull it out and run it through very quickly. So anyway, that's what's going on up on Beacon Hill. Again, I can talk to you more as you ask questions about this sort of thing, but I think, again, in general, what we need to do is try to fix immigration down in Washington, D.C. I hope to be a part of that solution in the future, and I'm really grateful to be on this panel. Thank you, Lou, for having me.
During the campaign, I met Jeff Sessions, and he said, I was great friends with Ted Kennedy. And he says, but I got to tell you, I love meeting you because it's so good to hear a man with a Boston accent talk about illegal immigration. Anyway, we're going to hear from the federal side of law enforcement, from Mr. Walt Hempel, retired ICE agent.
Early on, you may have heard that I'm a recently retired ICE agent. Well, paleontologists will say that dinosaurs disappeared a few years ago. I've retired twice from the federal government, which is rare. when I started out, typical of the federal government, I applied for a job at Fort Dix to teach school, and I ended up at the Border Patrol Academy in Los Fresnos, Texas. Didn't even know where the Border Patrol Academy was, let alone that I was going to be an immigration officer. So I went to the beautiful downtown area of Newark, New Jersey, and started my career there. But it was a good place to start, and I liked it. I liked my career. I have lots of opportunities. I actually worked in every single state in the United States, mostly working with law enforcement, either doing investigations or teaching. I've done a lot of teaching, and I think there is a difference between chiefs and sheriffs. I've taught for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Generally, chiefs of police report to a mayor, where sheriffs have to get elected. And I've also worked with the National Sheriff's Association, and there is a difference there, and you have to realize that difference. When I started out, things were a little simpler, okay? Most of the people that I arrested in New Jersey came in on a visa. They didn't come across the border illegally. They didn't come from Canada, they didn't come from Mexico. We had occasionally. We also had a lot of people, because we were a busy port, we had a lot of crewmen in those days that would jump ship when they got to the United States. But technology wasn't like it is today. When I arrested someone and he had come in as a visitor, and I had to determine how long he had been admitted as a visitor, I would have to pick up the phone and call Washington, D.C. for somebody to go through who knows how many millions of little cards down there to find this person. And that was a little frustrating too. But I can tell you that we worked, about 50% of our complaints that we worked were from other immigrants. They were from the immigrant community complaining about the bad apples that they wanted us to take out of their community. And we did respond to them. We did work with them. And I worked with people who I didn't arrest. I made an appointment to come in the office because I felt they had helped us and they should be rewarded for that. The other thing was that basically the court system functioned. We had judges, we had attorneys, we had everything we have today, but I can tell you most of the people that I arrested were deported in a week. And today that isn't the case. And part of the problem too is the amount of time it takes to move anybody today ties up the whole system. It's a little hard with 32 years to come up with what's the high points of it. Well, one is something that I'm going to tell this wonderful lady up front here who talked to me before, and it's the Law Enforcement Support Center. I don't know whether the police department knows about it, but back in '87 I was transferred to Washington to work, and then came up here to Boston. And one of the things they gave me to do was, in those days you could not get a computer check of an alien. A police officer would call our office at night. We'd call the answering service, and then they would call me, and I'm sitting at home in bed to respond down to for state police in New Jersey, but I have to call Washington to find out whether or not that person's good, bad, or indifferent. And this is a pretty lousy system to do things. So we came up with a thing called, now initially it was called the Criminal Alien Tracking Center. And that went up pretty far until we got the kind of the political appointees in Washington. Okay, and it became the Law Enforcement Support Center. Yep. It's up in Vermont, and it works very effectively. And it took a long time. It took me 5 years to get it going because immigration wasn't too hep on giving a written answer to law enforcement. You just couldn't pick up the phone and then the local ICE office, in those days it was the Criminal Investigation Division, would just say, well, we're too busy. And then you had to have a real record of it. And I say this because it was a pretty effective system up until I had put 21 states on board. Going out there, worked with them, got it on their computers, mobile data terminals, you could do it right in your car, sheriffs could do it at the jail, and you could get an answer. Now one place that really wanted it was Los Angeles County. Is that a sanctuary area today? Yes, I think it is. Well, it wasn't for me. I spent a week at the jail with an IT technician because They wanted us to run every foreign-born individual that's booked in. It's all done electronically when they came in, and we did. The Law Enforcement Support Center in Vermont, I won't say that was caused by a certain senator, but I think he had some influence. Pick that. And we went there and we worked with them, and this is a huge jail. You ever been out to it, Sheriff? No. It's twin towers. It's massive. They can handle up to 1,000 bookings a day in this one jail. Well, I went, we worked there, and it wasn't that difficult technically to do it. It was a load for Vermont. This is the same place that's the sanctuary city now. SCAP money. Well, I went to the final staff meeting with the sheriff and his crew, and we went over how now we could give you an answer right away, in writing, right away from the federal government. That was a big thing. But then he found out that the people who intaked didn't tell the people who released. So the people coming in were identified as aliens, and we gave them their classification, good or bad. And it's just as important to get a record of the person's legally here. You know, won't keep them any longer. But then the people who were released who did the SCAP money didn't have all the A numbers and identities of the people who came in the front door. And I can tell you, it was a loud exchange when they found out that they had lost almost $10 million in 1 year. This money is from the federal government because they didn't talk to each other, didn't talk to the federal government. Things change. I mean, it certainly changed for me, and I've been through, you gotta realize as an immigration agent, you have the changes of laws, changes of administration, changes of procedure, and you live in that environment. 1 year we were told for a census we weren't allowed to arrest anyone because the census was being taken away, and they scared people away from the census. I don't know how many illegal aliens report to the census, but I don't think we scared them. So, another thing, the alien community is very aware of all the changes in the law. We seem to think because they speak a different language, come from a different country, that they're not aware of what the laws are here. They know them very, very well. I retired the week before 9/11 mandatory. You had to retire at 57. I wasn't ready to retire, and my wife sure as heck wasn't ready for me to retire. I was miserable. Okay, so I go back to work. I worked as a contractor. I was in San Francisco on 9/11. I had done some things that were needed after 9/11, so they said I could come back, rehired me. There weren't too many of us came back. Remember, I was too old to carry a gun at 57, but I found the fountain of youth and came back. They gave me the same gun. But when I came back, we then worked with, believe it or not, to do the cross designation 287G. I was walking down the hall in Washington when they said, "Oh, come in here, Hempel, come in here." That can be good or that can be very bad. They gave me, that was very unpopular amongst the political people in Washington, 287G. So I went out and did it first in Florida, and then, yes, I did it in Alabama. And Senator Sessions, when I heard he was the new Attorney General, I was thrilled because I had spent almost a year in Alabama with his troopers, getting them trained in law enforcement for immigration purposes. And he was very, very supportive of that down there. A couple things that still kind of bug me because I came back and did 2 more years for the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, again, traveled a lot. But the 9/11 Commission then came up. I had just retired. I was going home. Now she wanted me, you know, I've been in Washington so long. But I get the call to go down to 9/11, and I had the pleasure of being on the 9/11 Commission. And that was a real eye-opener even for me after 32 years. Things that we just talk about so much. We have visitors. We have an awful lot of people here in the United States that are illegally here because they came in as visitors and as students. And we don't know when somebody leaves. We wrote that up. That was 2004. And it still hasn't been done. It's been studied to death. We didn't even know the terrorists, whether they were still in the country or had left the country, because we have no system. When you go to the airport, Nobody stamps your passport going out. You get stamped coming in, but not going out. That doesn't make much sense. Everybody will tell you how low the number of people overstaying is, except nobody really knows how low it is. And they just disappear. Also, material witnesses. I've worked with a lot of witnesses. I worked with people who were illegally here and had had major things done to them who we worked with. I worked wage and hour cases. I worked with Social Security. We had a huge racket going on with Social Security. Started out as one case. Ended up with my testifying before the Senate subcommittee on how people were establishing good Social Security accounts in the sense of all their information, except they were never here. And those were getting their quarters in those days to work here, even though these people were never here. How one person in Passaic, New Jersey got 200 Social Security cards in 1 year to a single family residence, and the federal government, not big thing. I worked with material witnesses who I felt sorry that they were being held in jail legally, and I got them jobs. I got them places where they could work. They're still reporting to us and working out quite well. So, as an agent, we work with everybody. The local police, most police do not want criminal activity in their town. That's what they get sworn to do. And yet we're saying that if you do commit the crime, we'll reward you for it. They won't tell the bad, friendly people about it, Go ahead. And then, of course, they go down the road and they do it somewhere else. And there's a lot of crime out there. In Jersey, I was the liaison with the New Jersey Department of Corrections. Up to that time, they went around to all the different jails and talked to the individuals who were in there. So I came up and said, look, they're all coming through one place. Let's do it there. It worked very, very well. And we were able to classify and get it all done. The local law enforcement is fabulous. And as I said, I've worked with them all over the United States, did a lot of time in Nebraska, a lot of time, that is not Massachusetts, folks. Okay? Very, very different environment. It was down in Alabama. Taught the Alabama State Troopers with an S. That's what they are. Federal government, 1 strike. Massachusetts, 2 strikes. I was really just hanging in there for a couple of months with these guys. But they turned out to be wonderful. And they really, one of the troopers, after taking the course on immigration, stopped a car, 2 people driving in it, male and female from Texas. He knew enough about immigration to ask some questions, intelligent questions. That led to some very unintelligent answers. And he called for the canine. And he got the largest load of heroin that they had gotten in that part of Alabama. And he said, I would not have gone further had I not known about the documents and so forth that they had. So I thank you all for being here tonight. It's been a great career, a long career. I felt I had done the right thing as a federal officer. It's not always the way you hear it, but we really do try to do the right thing. And thank you for being here.
Anyone that's ever seen a panel discussion from the National Press Club on illegal immigration or refugee crisis or what have you, it can get very dry and start dealing with statistics. And our next speaker is someone who's going to speak to us from the heart. She lost her son to a criminal illegal alien. She has a lot of courage. She's spoken out on the campaign trail and in other venues. And she made a long trip to come here and be with us tonight and share intimately what happened to her as a victim of illegal alien crime. Please welcome Maureen Maloney.
old, and he was the happiest, funniest person I ever known. He was one of those babies that was just born with a big smile on his face. And he genuinely loved people. Everybody in our hometown of Milford knew Matthew. If not personally, they knew him because when he would go to stores, he would chat with everybody, or as he was driving by, he'd give a thumbs up or the peace sign. So everybody knew Matthew. Matthew had planned to pursue a career in law enforcement after graduation. Yesterday was the 6th year anniversary of Matthew graduating from Framingham State University. And that was one of the happiest days of my life. I was so proud of Matthew. Little did I know it would be the last happiest day of my life. Less than 3 months later, on August 20th, 2011, my son Matthew Denice was tragically killed less than 2 miles from our home. Matthew was riding his motorcycle in a residential area with a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Nicholas Guaman, an illegal alien with a criminal record, ran through a stop sign, colliding with Matthew's motorcycle. Matthew landed on the hood and the windshield of Guaman's truck and rolled off into the street. Witnesses saw Matthew getting up out of the road. During the trial, the Boston medical examiner and the forensic experts testified that Matthew survived the initial collision with just scrapes and bruises. They were able to identify that it was a low-impact collision. Matthew had slowed down to 5 miles an hour, and the truck was only going about 7 miles an hour when it went through the stop sign. So by all accounts, he should have lived. But Nicholas Guaman, who was an illegal alien, did not have a driver's license and had spent his day drinking beer, made a fatal decision. He ran over Matthew, causing Matthew to become lodged in the front right wheel well. He dragged Matthew a quarter of a mile to his death while horrified witnesses yelled for him to stop and banged on his truck. Witnesses heard Matthew's blood-curdling screams as his body was torn apart over the course of that quarter of a mile. Matthew's body was impeding the forward motion of that front wheel of the truck. Nicholas Guaman knew he was dragging my son into his truck, but he continued to flee the police. Eventually, Guaman ran off the road and Matthew's body became dislodged. Guaman then backed up over Matthew to continue to flee. And he had a 6-year-old son in the truck during all this. My son's body left a quarter of a mile trail of blood, and in the end, Matthew was left dying on the sidewalk, his flesh ripped from his arms, chest, and abdomen, and his intestines were strewn beside him on the sidewalk. Every one of his ribs were broken in multiple places and ended up puncturing his heart, lungs, and other vital organs. My son is dead because our leaders have put illegal aliens ahead of Americans and legal immigrants. My son's killer was a criminal alien. His killer was no stranger to law enforcement. He had been charged multiple times for driving without a license and only received a slap on the wrist each time. He had multiple assault charges, including assaulting a police officer, and his criminal record dated back 7 years prior to killing Matthew. There's a huge difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. The minute you apply for permission to enter one is you apply for permission to enter this country, and the other one is done by breaking the laws of the country the minute you step foot on our soil without permission, or the minute your visa expires and you do not leave. Sanctuary cities are a magnet for illegal aliens who provide a safe haven for criminal aliens. Have you ever given much thought to what it takes for an illegal alien to survive? They need food and shelter, so they have to work, usually off the books, or usually fraudulent Social Security numbers. Both are illegal. Ironically, somebody has been using my other son's Social Security number for the past 6 years. Since 2011, my son's reported this to the police department, the FTC Identity Theft Unit, and the IRS, and it still continues. Every year when he files his taxes, he has a big hassle getting his refund. And they will not give him the other name associated with his Social Security number. So he's just kind of locked into this. Back to your thought about what it must take for an illegal alien to survive. They need to work and shop for food just like we do. Many of them have to drive. And Massachusetts does not issue a driver's license to illegal aliens, so they drive with no driver's training. They don't pass a written test, they don't pass a practical test, and they don't have a driver's license. And many of them don't even read English, so they can't read the signs on our road. Again, all of this is illegal activity, and they're a danger on the road. Another anecdote. My son Matthew was involved with 3 minor fender benders in Milford in the 6 years that he drove before he was killed. 2 were hit and runs, and when you chase them down, each time it ended up being an illegal alien that had hit him and fled. The 3rd accident was while he was working at a pharmacy, and the lady came into the pharmacy. She was a U.S. citizen, and she wanted to page overhead the license plate number of who the car belonged to so she could give her insurance information. That's the difference between legal and illegal. What happens when an illegal alien is sick or injured? They use our emergency room and we get stuck paying the bill by way of taxes. I work in healthcare. We are not allowed to ask somebody what their immigration status is. We can be fired for that. Or they get mass health. And yes, they do get mass health. Nicholas Guaman was a 31-year-old healthy man, father, worked as a roofer, and he was on mass health when he killed my son. That's where your tax dollars go. Who do you think educates their minor children when they get brought here, or even the adults that were, the 18, 19-year-olds that were coming over the border and getting put into high school in Lynn a couple of years ago? We pay for all that. English isn't their first language. Those schools are so overburdened financially trying to accommodate those students. And criminal aliens prey on those illegal aliens that come here maybe for the right reasons, to get a job and have a better life. But they're preyed upon by criminal aliens. Illegal aliens also have a much higher rate of fleeing an accident when they have one. I don't have the statistics here in front of me, but statistically they flee at a much higher rate than U.S. citizens. I could go on for much longer, but we do have the time limit. There are many ways that illegal aliens have to break the law to survive. Many people actually set illegal aliens up to be criminals because they just turn their head to them being here. We're not doing many of them a service by letting them be here and break our laws. Harboring an illegal alien is a crime, just as Sheriff Hodgson had said. So I'm not going to repeat what he had said, but aiding, abetting, and harboring an illegal alien is a crime on the books. You may have seen the bracelets I have at the table. They have names of innocent Americans and legal immigrants that have been killed by illegal aliens. Over the last couple of years, I've met hundreds of parents across the country who've had their child killed by illegal aliens. Illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. My son Matthew paid the ultimate price. My family paid the ultimate price. And too many other victims in Massachusetts and around the country have paid the ultimate price. We must end sanctuary cities and enforce our current laws. Thank you.
I'm getting a reminder. Thank you very much. For those people that want, we have all of the people that are helped to put this event on, the Renew Mass Coalition, Bostonians Against Sanctuary Cities, and the Massachusetts Coalition for Immigration Reform. We have a central sign-up sheet out there. You can give us your email address, your cell phone, and we have such a great turnout tonight. We're going to have other events, and I think the next one is scheduled to be about refugee dumping. So that'll be a very interesting evening. And now I'm going to ask Chanel Prunier if she could help by collecting the questions and answers that people have written out, and we'll move into the question and answer period. And,
Can you warm up the room a little bit?
you mean with some more jokes?
No, the heat. Kill it. Lower the temperature.
Okay, our coalition that allows for enforcement to decide which laws to enforce.
Well, where's the justification for enforcing the law? Is that the question?
For the where is the legal justification that allows you or law enforcement to decide which laws to enforce?
Well, the justification, I'm not sure I understand the question completely. As far as I'm concerned, it's not our place to pick and choose what laws to enforce. If I knew if I knew a little bit more about what the motivation around that is, I might be able to better answer it. But as far as I'm concerned, we don't pick and choose. The laws are on the book, so it's our responsibility to enforce those laws. If we don't like the laws, then it's our responsibility to change those laws.
It'll be a little easier. Maybe not. I don't know, you can put your hand up if you want to take this question. It doesn't say who it's for, but what's the difference between a sanctuary city and a welcoming city?
That's a really good question. There can be a couple different differences. Some jurisdiction, to me, having a policy that simply expresses that a community wants to welcome immigrants is a good policy, and does not in itself mean that a jurisdiction is a sanctuary policy, for example, one that would be potentially subject to losing federal funding as a process that's now moving forward for certain law enforcement grants. The most important factor is that a sanctuary policy is one that deliberately and knowingly seeks to interfere, hinder, obstruct immigration enforcement by preventing cooperation, communication, exchange of information. It can take a lot of forms. It can be blocking ICE from access to the jail. It can be failing to comply with detainers that ICE issues to notify a law enforcement agency that they want to take custody of an offender that's at a jail or at a police lockup. Or not allowing local officers to communicate with ICE to ask questions. But there are some jurisdictions that, out of fear of being targeted for consequences because of their illegal sanctuary policy, they've tried to change the name and say, oh, we're not a sanctuary, we're welcoming. The latest one is a trust community. They use that as a way of not having to use the word sanctuary, which they know is politically radioactive. But it's not so much what you call the policy, it's what the effect is. And that's what the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security are going to be looking at when they are investigating jurisdictions that have sanctuary policies. And there are 10 of them now that have already been put on notice by the Department of Justice. This was a process that was started last year under the Obama administration at the behest of members of Congress. And there are 10 jurisdictions that have until June 30th to prove that they're complying with the law, or they're going to lose access to certain types of federal funding. One of them has already changed its policy in response to the federal government's move to impose consequences on them. That's Miami-Dade County in Florida is no longer a sanctuary jurisdiction. They're now fully cooperating with ICE. So that's evidence of how things are changing.
If I can just add one thing, there's a bit of misinformation, and that is that ICE officials are requiring, you sort of hear the argument that ICE officials are requiring or getting help from the Sheriff's Department or local law enforcement police officers in raids. That is not true. ICE officials conduct their own activities, and they let local law enforcement know that they will be conducting that activity to make sure that people are aware. But there is no requirement by ICE officials to have local law enforcement participate with them, and therefore there are no local resources being expended, and that becomes one of the major arguments when these politicians are saying, I don't want my law enforcement it costing me, my city, any money to have law enforcement work with ICE. They're not having to do that work. They're just keeping the communication flow open, and ICE is coming in and doing their job.
There was, putting these events together, you don't, you forget things. And one important group that I forgot to thank is the motorcycle clubs and the Bikers for Trump that came out tonight to protect everyone. Everybody's seen the videos of things that happened at Berkeley, and it's just great that we can be here together, and I'm glad they came. Listen, I promised that I would take every question, even the ones I didn't agree with, and this is one of them. How many people were killed in Massachusetts by drunk drivers who are American citizens over the last 10 years?
Non sequitur.
Well,
Non sequitur.
all I have to say is illegal aliens should not be here. So if they weren't here, my son would not be killed. And
I'm not sure what difference it makes as to how many. One death by a drunk driver is too many, and I don't care who does it. So we shouldn't feel any comfort in the fact that maybe there may be more American citizens who have been responsible for people dying in drunk driving accidents than illegals. But as Maureen said, how do you even, in her instance, even ask a question with her, even if it was just her son that was lost over the course of 3 years, 5 years? That's one too many, and certainly to even think of the hardship of an illegal immigrant that was here. As she said, and I remember Paul Patrick saying when we were at the funeral, the very next day, he said, this isn't a drunk driver, this isn't a legal immigrant situation. This is a drunk driving accident. And shame on that former governor for having such sensitivity around the truth and trying to parlay it into something else. That's like saying, I've heard this said too, how many, do you know how many more crimes are committed by Americans? Well, we have a lot more American citizens, obviously, in our country, but forget that. How many more crimes we have committed by American citizens than we do illegal immigrants? We're supposed to take solace that illegal immigrants commit less crimes? Are you kidding me? That's like saying that, we're supposed to feel good that MS-13 and these other vicious gangs commit more murders than the average criminals who aren't in the gangs. Why would we want even one more nasty, vicious crime by anybody? There's no solace in any of that, and there's no reason for a basis of argument in that comparison. The question is, do we have people here who are illegal that shouldn't be here, and could other people still have their loved ones living with them as Maureen would have if that person had never come in here, knowingly come into this country illegally and caused the death of her son?
A recent Boston Police Department report indicates 69% of the heroin trade in Boston is controlled by illegal Dominican immigrants. Is a solution to the opioid epidemic related to our immigration system? Is the solution to the opioid epidemic related to our immigration system?
Well, I think it absolutely is, and we've been able to find it. In fact, I think the sheriff could tell me even better than I could about the trail here in Massachusetts. It tends to come from Fall River up through Brockton and goes up north to, is it Lawrence? I think there's sort of a strong connection of gangs in those areas. But this is exactly why, and I think a lot of folks here have Trump stickers on. I think Donald Trump spoke specifically about the fact that he wanted secure borders, not just along the southern border, but making sure we were doing a better job of making sure we tighten up immigration into our country, because not just people who are living here illegally, but also the fact that there was either terrorists coming in through our porous southern border or also drug trafficking that's happening through our southern border. And so I think that's why the whole construction of the southern wall was so important to him during the campaign. Now, of course, the decision in Washington, D.C. to kind of delay the southern wall seems to be, something that I'm finding disappointment with fellow Republicans on not moving that forward. I think they should be doing it. It was very clear in his campaign that that was going to be something that we should be working to achieve. And again, hopefully they can start moving on that more quickly than they are right now.
For 15 years, I was the immigration coordinator for the New England Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. We covered the 6 New England states and maintained liaison with the 4 Maritime. And ICE plays a critical role in drug enforcement, critical. Even in Boston, Massachusetts, and in New England, there was a large percentage, I would say the majority of our large major narcotics cases involved aliens. Where does things come from? If you're going to be trust, you're going to trust the family. You're going to trust your relatives to get the drugs up here and bring them in. And I got to say that ICE does a really, really important job there. Frequently we have knowledge of documents and language and everything else that the average officer doesn't have.
Don't get old, kids. Why should our limited local and state tax dollars pay for federal immigration actions, especially when states will not be reimbursed, especially when tax revenues are not meeting expectations? I'm against this on these grounds.
Well, first of all, the idea that we're spending our hard-earned tax dollars, we've heard this, we're squandering state tax dollars by doing our role in partnering with ICE. That's just not true. ICE pays us $99 per day per person that we're detaining on their behalf as deportation issues or deportation considerations. But more than that, if you would have a problem with that, then you'd have to have a problem with the fact that we have state troopers, we have people from my department, and others who are funded by the state, our budgets come from the state, who were serving full-time, not in my facility, not in their police departments, or state police barracks, on the FBI terrorism task force, the FBI gang task force, ATF, DEA. So you'd have to have a problem with that too. And say, I don't want my tax dollars to be used for that person's salary to be on that task force. And if you believe that, then basically you will be unraveling the whole understanding that we have, and particularly post 9/11, that if we're going to be able to protect the people of this nation and our legal residents, we have to share intelligence resources. Because you know what? DEA, ICE, FBI, they're not in the neighborhoods every day, they're not in the streets. You could go to my facility and find a network of gangs that stretch from my facility to my county to Providence. We're doing a huge press conference tomorrow on a big major bust that we've done with Providence, Rhode Island, and others. And the only reason it happened was because we did share our resources for one interest: the safety of our communities, families, and for our nation. And if we do not do that, and we start to create these lines of saying, that's a federal responsibility, that's a local responsibility, then I can assure you, you can expect crime to spread like that across this entire nation, and we will no longer have the ability to control it, because that's what will happen. So this notion that we're wasting money, we're not wasting money. I can't think of anything more important than for us to partner as we did after 9/11. We found out FBI, CIA, and everybody else weren't communicating well enough leading up to 9/11. We knew that. We learned it from that. And those of us who were in the rescue effort, we saw the breakdowns. But you know what? That was the time that we recognized, not again. We can't allow this to happen again. We have to partner, we have to share resources and work in regional blocks. And that's why we've been able to prevent a lot of these terrorist attacks. And that's why we're able to do the kind of job we do to stay on top of these gangs and the illegals that are coming in here. So that is basically my answer.
That's good.
Just a couple things real quick. Does it cost money to cooperate with ICE? There can be some minor costs associated with holding offenders for ICE to pick up and put on the path to deportation. But first of all, but the cost issue is really another one of these kind of bogus excuses that sanctuary jurisdictions use to justify their policy. First of all, local jurisdictions are reimbursed for a fraction of the costs that they have for holding criminal aliens. And the SCAP program is one of the programs, though, that they are going to be debarred from if they do not cooperate with federal authorities going forward. But also, what local law enforcement agencies will tell you is that they actually, by cooperating with ICE and removing criminal aliens from the community instead of sending them back to the streets, they're actually saving their taxpayers money because, as one jurisdiction put it, that has a 287G program, for just a couple of hours of work by the local booking officer to process the person for deportation, they save county taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars in future costs to for that person who's stands a very high likelihood of reoffending, and that's not to mention the cost to the future victims. And we have to remember, again, illegal immigration itself is very expensive. Here in our state, we're spending about almost $2 billion a year for a whole range of services that illegal aliens have access to. About 50% of all immigrant-headed households are accessing some form of welfare program. And so that's a cost to illegal immigration that we have, and we will, by cooperating in the deportation of criminals who can be removed, that is a tax savings for our strapped budgets already.
But just hang on to this. This one's for you. Jessica, what is your answer to the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center has declared the Center on Immigration Studies a hate group?
Southern Poverty Law Center.
The fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center has called us a hate group doesn't make that a fact. It's not a fact. This is a malicious smear that has been concocted by the once reputable Southern Poverty Law Center to try to have organizations whose positions they disagree with shunned and not be permitted to express those views. It's not working, obviously, and I've had many folks tell me that they think it's really damaged the brand of the SPLC. But it's a lie. It's a malicious smear. It's not true. We're not a hate group, of course. So I've already said more than enough on it.
What's the basis for their
Thank you, Jessica. Next question is from a great pro-lifer from the neighborhood, John Curry. If Marty Walsh and the city council vote to make Boston a sanctuary city, will the citizenry impeach him, try them in court, and will federal money be withheld? That's a mouthful, John. Anybody want to take that?
I don't think impeachment is going to be happening in Boston, and there already was discussion about federal money being withheld, and I think that Jeff Sessions has made that fairly clear. But again, I think the decision by cities like Somerville, Joe Chiarotoni, he originally was one of the original sanctuary city mayors. And even he has pulled back in his position and said that, no, we will work with law enforcement. So I think that they're starting to realize that the Trump administration, Jeff Sessions, is serious about that, and that going forward, it really, welcoming cities, again, I think we said is fine, but to actually cut off law enforcement's access to data and working with ICE is a mistake, and I think they are realizing that as well.
Another thing that's starting to happen, I got a call this afternoon from a reporter from a Boston paper saying that one of the candidates for mayor of Boston was introducing an ordinance to bar ICE from going into the city schools to arrest children.
Without a warrant.
This is nothing but malicious manipulation and fear-mongering in the immigrant community. The idea that ICE is actually thinking about or ever did go into schools to arrest children is absurd. It never happens, never will happen. It is just nothing but manipulation of this idea and creating fear among immigrants. And I'm sorry, I think it's malicious and wrong.
I guess what
For political purposes.
And I should add one more thing too, and just let me stand up. I can't see everybody in the back. Let me go over here. One of the other things that happened, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, I live in the town of Whitman, I neighbor Brockton. Anybody know Brockton?
Yeah.
Okay, there was a state rep from Brockton who decided that she was going to, on Facebook, warn the neighborhood that there was going to be an ICE raid. Now, there was not an ICE raid that actually happened. That was misinformation to begin with, but again, same point, fear-mongering for political purposes. In fact, she then put a campaign contribution post up on the Facebook page like a day later. So look, there is an attempt, obviously, to villainize law enforcement, to spread misinformation about what they do, about what funds come into with ICE, and what funds are not being used by ICE. We're just living in a very strange time right now. I think it's 300 cities across the country are sanctuary, have sanctuary status. Massachusetts has this slew. Hull, I know there's some Hull folks here. Even
we defeated it.
you just defeated it the other night. I was born in the summer of '69, okay? I remember the counterculture. There is some weird counterculture movement here saying that law enforcement shouldn't be doing their job. We've got a senior senator from Massachusetts that went to an NAACP event saying that law enforcement is terrorizing the African American community. We have got to stop dividing our country on issues like this and working together, helping law enforcement help keep our citizens safe so that we don't have another Matthew Denice. That's all I'll say.
I've only done 32 years of law enforcement for ICE, and that isn't really a long time. But I never went to a school to arrest anybody. And I don't know it.
Can I ask a follow-up question, please?
No, if you have a question, you can fill out a slip.
It's about the same issue.
So we can put it in the pile. Everyone else, just follow the rules. That's all.
I think that's kind of the basis of tonight, right? Follow the rules. So this is regarding the fear of reporting crimes. Are you saying that ICE cannot arrest and deport a person simply because that person is here illegally? I think the person was referring to the fact that I think a couple of people on the panel said we have a lot of illegal aliens that do cooperate with law enforcement, and their question is, are you saying that ICE cannot arrest and deport a person simply because they're here illegally if they cooperate?
A little confused on the question. ICE has great latitude under the law, under policy and practice. Police come to us all the time with witnesses to crimes or victims of crimes who are here illegally. We don't pick them up, take them off, and throw them in jail. We'll process them. We'll give them temporary paperwork. Every U.S. Attorney's Office is a victim witness coordinator who's there to work with people in somewhat of a social worker context. I've encountered many illegal aliens that I gave a call-in letter to come to the office. And they came to the office and we processed them there, and they still are in deportation, but we're not locked up. So there's great latitude in what an officer can do.
Thanks, Walt. I'm going to take this one. A more balanced panel would have included at least one member from a different perspective, in particular a supporter of the Boston as a sanctuary city. Why did the organizers of this event fail to include that voice? Well, the name of our group is Bostonians Against Sanctuary Cities.
They don't invite us to
Any other questions? No, seriously, we live in a time that we all operate under this horrible tyranny of political correctness. And I don't live too far away from here, and I can tell you there have been 3 different events celebrating sanctuary cities that got big coverage in the local papers. And we couldn't even get one of the local reporters out here from the weekly paper. They ignored us, ignored our calls. So, who's, oh, somebody's on the phone. Don't let me interrupt you. Let's see. Hasn't Mayor Walsh already determined and broadcast to mayors across the country that Boston is, in fact, a sanctuary city?
Yes, indeed he has. Boston is a sanctuary city. with sanctuary policy that interferes and hinders ICE from doing its job. And there are criminal aliens who get released back to the streets of Boston who should instead be put on the path to deportation. It's a real sanctuary because of the Trust Act that the supporters want to take statewide. And that's the hearing that's going to take place on June 9th.
Thank you. It seems most religious groups support immigrant rights in sanctuaries. Can you tell us what religions oppose sanctuary cities? And is Commissioner Evans lying when he says that complete cooperation with ICE does dampen the willingness of immigrants to come to the police? I think we handled question number 2 a couple of times. So anybody want to comment on the religious groups that support immigrant rights?
As far as I know, all religions support immigrant rights. It's the illegal immigrant. It's they don't have the rights to do that.
I would also point out that the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is probably one of the greatest documents in testament to the natural law, says that a government may make legitimate rules for people to enter countries. And I'm paraphrasing that because I left my catechism at home.
Pro-sanctuary.
Speak for yourself. You get the catechism. It's section 2440. 2440. The Catholic bishops make a fortune off of the refugees and off the illegal aliens.
Right.
And I'm a Catholic.
Do not lie. Do not lie. Be quiet. We serve a little courtesy, sir. Be quiet.
If you, can I just make a comment here? Sir, the Catholic Church, and I'm a Catholic, in order for you to become a Catholic in the church, do you have to meet certain requirements? Do you have to do certain things to get in? You have to do certain things. Are there rules to become a Catholic? Or can you just go to the church and become a Catholic?
Catholic? Yes.
The answer is yes.
Okay. Well, the reason, and I heard you mention something when I made the comment about the Jewish community.
The Jews, many of the Jewish, as you know, there's more than one kind of Judaism.
Right.
Most of the Judaism support immigrant rights, including religion. Well, we might disagree about the law, but I know religion. Well, most of the religious groups, and this was not my question, but the religious groups are in fact supporting immigrants. Did you see 60 Minutes on Sunday night? Oh, that's right.
Come on, we're going to move this along. There's a panel here. There's not a debate. We'll do a debate another night, I promise you. We got a great turnout. We'll have a debate another night. Give me your number. We'll get you up here. Is it true the federal government withdrew the policy that restrained ICE agents from detaining illegals outside courts, hospitals, and schools?
I don't know what today's rulings are because they've changed a great deal. As when I worked, and I can only go back all the years, it changed somewhat. But generally, in fact, I was with a judge from Ohio this weekend. I asked him that very question, what do you do? And he said, we work with ICE, and normally they don't come in the courtroom because they meet them afterwards. And our court officers work with us, and that's the way it's done. That's why it's been done for me. I've testified in court a lot. But
it never has been against policy for ICE to make an arrest in a courthouse. It's not one of the so-called sensitive locations. And the ironic thing is that the sanctuary policies are what force ICE into places like courthouses to make arrests. The reason they make arrests in courthouses is because a local sanctuary policy has released that individual and ICE has to go get them. They want to do it in a courthouse because courthouses screen people for security and they know that they're not going to be armed. So it's safe for the agent and safe for the public to make an arrest in that courthouses. And I would say if people object to ICE making arrests in courthouses, they ought to be against sanctuary policies because that's what is causing so much of that now.
And if anyone's keeping score, I'm doing one pro, one anti question, rotating, trying to rotate things. So this is not from one of our supporters, but the Safe Communities Bill specifically address only voluntary communications between local and federal entities. So it's weird that the CIS speaker made it seem like proponents want to block that. This obfuscation is troubling.
No, it would, yes, those communications are, the idea that what it makes it a sanctuary policy is that they prohibit communication between local officials and ICE. And that is what makes a sanctuary policy against federal law. And that's what I spoke of, Section 1373 of the law says that it is illegal to have a policy that prohibits communication or exchange of information between local officials and federal immigration authorities.
Let's see. How are we doing on time? Nobody's got a cake in the oven back home?
Actually,
How about we just do a couple more questions, all right? So, is any effort made to track people who have overstayed visas?
ICE uses about 2% of its resources to try to find those, that small fraction of visa overstayers that it believes may be a national security threat. That's pretty much the only resources they have dedicated to finding overstays. There was just a report released the other day that by DHS that found that in 2016, more than 700,000 people stayed beyond their authorized duration of stay, became overstays in the country. That's a lot of people ignoring the terms of their admission to the U.S.
And ICE is defining criminal activity as DUIs, traffic violations, and entering the country illegally. These are not violent offenses. How are these individuals such a threat that they should be deported?
Well, first of all, my son was killed by somebody that had multiple DUIs and driving without license violations, and if he had been deported, my son would still be here now.
Look, President Trump's made clear, and the law enforcement community has been very focused on this, as has us. We are absolutely targeting the criminal illegal aliens. This is a public safety issue, it's a national security issue. Frankly, there are plenty of criminal illegal aliens in this country that we have not been able to track down, from gangs to potential terrorists to people who are involved in all kinds of pretty deep frauds and things like that that are a threat to our communities and to our quality of life. So the long and short of this is that they don't really have the time or the manpower to be chasing down the others. It's not to say that somebody may not come across their path with some other issue around that overstay that might bring that person to sort of a red flag position, but they're not out there just looking for people who are overstaying. DUIs, yeah, absolutely. And remember, it was President Clinton in 1996 who issued a directive from the White House following Oklahoma City. When they thought it was an international terrorist, he sent a White House directive out to all the PDs, the prisons and so forth, and said, reach into your populations and see if you can find anybody that's here illegally and get them moving toward removal out of this country. And it was at that time that they started to change the laws that were deportable offenses. At the time, DUI was not a deportable offense. But then Congress said, oh yes, it's going to be, we're going to add it to the list. And so were a number of other crimes that weren't deportable offenses, but at that time, it was determined that they wanted to move forward and add the additional ones, and DUI happened to be one of them.
I want to thank the audience the citizens and non-citizens, everyone that's here, that were concerned about this topic, the people that agreed and disagreed. We had a moment of silence to start out this meeting, and I'm going to share a little secret with you. I thanked God that I live in a country where the people that were outside on the sidewalk with signs were free to come in here and sit down and be part of this program, and I want to thank them tonight for coming in. Jessica Vaughan has been smeared and knocked around in the past couple of weeks, and we have another lovely lady on our panel, Maureen, and she has paid the ultimate sacrifice of a citizen. And Geoff Diehl is going to make a presentation on behalf of our group to both of these panelists, and I'm sorry to the men, no flowers for you. I want to thank everyone for coming. The flower is open.